If you're even a little bit interested in whiskey, or, collector's items in general, you know the name Van Winkle.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a name that's so steeped in legend that the bottles themselves feel less like spirits and more like, I don't know, ancient artifacts.
They do. And for years, the whole story of Julian Van Winkle III has been driven by that lore, right? Scarcity and these incredible secondhand stories.
Exactly.
But today, we're going to try and cut through that haze. We're focusing on the verifiable facts about the bottles themselves, the actual tangible output of the man who pretty much by accident created the modern bourbon collecting craze.
And our guide for this deep dive is this magnificent, almost obsessively detailed book, Gil L. Schwartz's Van Winkle, The Bespoke Barrels.
And it's not a biography. That's the key thing here.
No, it's like archival forensics. Our mission is to use Schwartz's incredible documentation to track Julian Van Winkle III's career bottle by bottle.
From the depths of what they call the Great Bourbon Crisis all the way up to finishing the Pappy set.
So if you're listening, this is for you. This is the who, what, and where of these iconic bottles, all laid out.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we even get to the barrels, we have to talk about the guy behind the book, Gil L. Schwarz. You said he had to be obsessive to pull this off. What makes him the person who could even tackle the Van Winkle archives?
Well, his entire career has been about establishing provenance, which is exactly what the Van Winkle world needed. I mean, we're talking over 35 years in the beverage industry.
Primarily fine and rare wine and whiskey.
Right, and he spent more than 2 decades as a professional authenticator.
So he knows how to look at a piece of paper and tell if it's real or if it's just a story somebody made up.
Precisely. His background is it's phenomenal. He set up the Hong Kong operations for the auction house Acre Maryland Condit.
And that's hundreds of millions of dollars in spirits auctions.
Yeah, and that kind of work demands a forensic eye for detail. So he was perfectly suited to go in and tackle Julian's often chaotic production records.
Yeah.
The French government even gave him the Officier d'honneur du mérite agricole. I mean, he has the credentials.
Okay, but let's be blunt for a second. He spent 9 months in Julian's office. That sounds less like journalism and, a bit more like collaboration. Does the book deal with that potential for bias?
It does, and it navigates it by focusing relentlessly on the evidence. The scope of the book is, by design, incredibly narrow. It is strictly about Julian Van Winkle III's bottles.
Nothing else.
It avoids the family history, the personal stories, all the stuff that's been covered really well by people like Sally Van Winkle Campbell or Wright Thompson. This is pure reference.
And the book itself is being treated like an artifact. It's almost $800.
It's built like an archival vault, designed to last 100 years.
Yeah.
Huge. It's beautiful. Genuine leather binding, hand-sewn pages, printed on this thick, acid-free Japanese art paper.
That's incredible.
And Julian himself actually convinced Gil to use the leather. He showed him this calf leather-bound book that was given to his grandfather, Pappy, back in 1949. Yeah. And said the leather symbolized Pappy's disdain of synthetics. So it connects this modern archive directly to the family's whole tradition.
That is just an amazing level of detail. And here's where it gets really interesting for me. This isn't just an archive. It's being called a standard setter for the entire spirits collector community.
It is. The industry feedback is comparing it to the seminal reference work for Rolex collectors.
So it's not just recording history. It might actually shape categories and preserve history.
That's the idea. It's the definitive catalog that collectors have been desperate for. But to understand why it was so hard to compile, we have to go back to when Julian started. He came into the business at the worst possible time.
Right. Let's go back to 1977. Julian's just out of college. He's working at a clothing store, Rhodes Rapier. He gets offered a promotion to become a buyer.
And in that moment, he has this epiphany.
He just realizes, I do not want to spend my life in the clothing business.
And that timing was perfect. His father, Big Van, had been running J.P. Van Winkle & Son since '72, and immediately asks Julian's wife if Julian might want to join the family business.
And he jumped in right as the entire industry was just imploding.
We can't stress enough how bad it was. The late '70s, early '80s, it was a complete disaster for bourbon.
Demand was in the basement. People wanted vodka and gin.
And distilleries were closing all over Kentucky. People thought it was the hardest time for the industry since Prohibition.
So how do you even survive that if you can't sell whiskey for what it is?
You sell it in novelty packaging. They leaned hard into what the book calls the decanter solution.
This was that collectible glass and porcelain decanter craze that Jim Beam started decades earlier.
Big Van relied on them heavily. They were filling these things with 7-year-old bourbon, mostly from Glenmore barrels, sometimes some old Fitzgerald juice, and calling it Old Rip Van Winkle.
And this is the key financial detail, right?
It's crucial. The decanters let them charge a premium. Selling the standard Old Rip Van Winkle in a glass bottle was barely profitable. A case of 12 bottles was only selling for $24.50.
That nothing.
The decanter business basically made up for all of it by adding collectible value to the container, not just the liquid inside.
And in the middle of all this chaos, Julian starts his first real bespoke project.
He does. He takes an 11-year-old Stitzel-Weller bourbon, distilled in 1967, and decides to market it just to the Louisville area.
And this is where that bespoke touch comes in, which kind of foreshadows the whole modern scarcity thing.
It really does. Each of those bottles had a front label that was handwritten in calligraphy by an employee in the office, a woman named Carol Nord. They were personal.
So those cases sold for $42.50, almost double the price the standard stuff. And that little effort provided this crucial, tiny financial lifeline for the company.
It did. But that small success was just immediately interrupted by this profound crisis.
In 1981, Big Van, who was a WWII tank commander, passed away. He was only 67.
And the blow was devastating, both personally and commercially. The moment Big Van was gone, Norman Hayden.
The president of the old Fitzgerald distillery.
Yeah, a guy who Big Van had actually hired years earlier. He just ended the bottling relationship, pulled the rug right out from under Julian.
I just can't imagine that pressure. You lose your father, and then immediately your main production partner, someone your father helped, just cuts off your entire operation.
He wasn't just building a company. He was fighting for its survival during the industry's lowest point. He had to completely reorganize everything and set up shop at Commonwealth Distillery in Lawrenceburg.
And that fight lasted through the 80s.
It did. But thankfully, the market finally started to shift. You see the bourbon comeback start in the early 1990s, and that set the stage for a really critical conversation.
The one with Marcy Palatella. She encouraged him to create a super premium brand.
Which led to the creation of Pappy Van Winkle in 1994.
And this is the genesis of the iconic lineup we all know.
And it was an enormous risk. For that first Pappy 20, Julian used these 20-year-old or older Old Boone barrels he got from the Wild Turkey Distillery.
He knew the liquid was, what do you say, insanely great.
Yeah, but domestically, people just weren't used to bourbon aged that long. The conventional wisdom back then was that 10, maybe 12 years was the absolute maximum.
So he's releasing a 20-year-old bourbon into a market that wasn't even sure it wanted a 10-year-old bourbon.
Exactly. It was a huge commercial gamble. And domestically, sales were slow at first.
But it took off internationally.
It took off in Japan, specifically. And that provided the vital initial push. It proved the concept.
So international success saves the brand, and Palatella sees that there's demand for more.
Yes. She convinces him to bottle a rye whiskey for the Japanese market in '97. That lays the foundation for the Van Winkle family rye.
And then the set gets fleshed out even more.
Pappy 23 is added in 1998, using these old stocks, mostly Fleischmann, Glenmore, and of course that legendary Stitzel-Weller juice that were still aging in his rickhouse.
And then came the big infrastructure move.
Correct. The transition of bottling to Buffalo Trace was completed in 2002. Then, the Old Rip 15 becomes the new Pappy 15 in 2004, and that's it. That completes the full lineup we now call the Pappy set. 6 phenomenal, now mythical, bottlings.
And the book covers every single detail of his work from that Commonwealth era, right? From 83 to 2002, and all those bespoke single barrels at Buffalo Trace after.
Every single one.
Which brings us back to Schwartz's research integrity. He didn't just use anecdotes. He spent 3 years making sure this was the definitive account. What kind of archival forensics are we talking about here?
I mean, he literally worked in Julian's office for 9 months, going through every piece of original source material to fact check.
It's not just reading reports.
No, we're talking about Julian's old, handwritten, green production cards from Lawrenceburg and binders full of pink invoice carbon copies. This was him, poring over dusty original documents to confirm every single bottling's origin, distillation date, and volume.
He even referenced Julian's own public comments, right? Like on the straightbourbon.com forums.
He did. 264 entries between 1999 and 2012, where Julian would talk directly to enthusiasts about production. That level of cross-referencing is why the book is considered the definitive catalog.
And that forensic work is so necessary because of the current collector culture, where the book itself, at nearly $800, is called an allocated book. The irony there is just...
It's palpable, and you see that debate about value everywhere.
The source material brings up these ultra-rare bottles, like the $6,000 Double Eagle, very rare. And one user perfectly summed up the whole value proposition, saying it tastes like $200 whiskey poured from a $5,800 decanter.
That quote just nails the core issue of the modern market, doesn't it? Valuing the vessel, the scarcity, the status, way more than the liquid inside.
And yet, the book's history makes it clear what the true collectors want.
It's so clear. Most true enthusiasts agree that the most admired, the most desirable bottles from Julian Van Winkle III are all pre-Buffalo Trace. They're the ones that contain that legendary Stitzelweller juice.
So if you connect all of that, it just proves that Julian's lasting reputation, it wasn't built on celebrity or branding.
Not at all. It was built purely on this unrelenting pursuit of quality, of finding the best barrels during a time of intense commercial pressure. It's a tradition he inherited directly from Pappy.
It's a remarkable legacy.
Chronicled during a period of total industry chaos.
Well, this deep dive has been a fantastic tribute to the craftsmanship of Julian Van Winkle III, all made possible by the archival obsession of Gil L. Schwarz. I mean, a massive effort to catalog decades of work during Bourbon's most chaotic era.
And it leaves us with something important to think about. We saw that Julian and his father survived the recession of the 70s and 80s by relying on profitable, decorative, collectible packaging those decanters. So considering the current ultra-high secondary prices for Pappy, where the bottles are once again valued far more for rarity and status than the liquid inside, what does this cyclical obsession with manufactured scarcity really say about the modern luxury market?
It's a good question.
I feel like we've circled right back to the decanter era, you know? Just with a much higher price tag attached to some plain glass.